What if everything you learned about Native Americans came from Hollywood, outdated textbooks, or flat-out lies? Today, we're unpacking 10 common myths that still shape how people see Native communities. And we're here to set the record straight. This is First Nations Uncovered. Let's get into it. In reality, the vast majority of Native people work regular jobs, pay taxes, and face the same financial pressures as everyone else. And sometimes worse. Now yes, some tribes do distribute per capita payments to their enrolled members. But these payments don't come from the federal government. They come from tribally run businesses like casinos, oil leases, or timber sales. And even then, it's not universal. Only a small percentage of tribes offer this. Many tribal communities, especially those in rural or underdeveloped regions, don't have casinos or profitable enterprises. For them, the free money myth isn't just wrong, it's offensive. This myth erases the real economic hardship in many Native communities and fuels resentment and misinformation. Native people are doctors, teachers, truck drivers, ranchers. They hustle every day. And like all Americans, they deserve truth, not stereotypes. You've probably heard the claim that all Native Americans get free health care. But that's misleading at best, and dangerously wrong at worst. Yes, many Native people are eligible for care through the Indian Health Service, or IHS. But that system wasn't created out of generosity. It's part of the federal government's trust responsibility, born from treaties, legal contracts, where Native nations ceded vast lands in exchange for essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. So IHS isn't a gift, it's part of a deal. And yet, the government has consistently underfunded it. Clinics are often understaffed, outdated, and ill-equipped. Many rural IHS facilities don't offer emergency care, cancer treatment, or even basic mental health services. Some tribal members have to drive hours just for an appointment. And if you live off reservation, in a city or outside an IHS service zone, you may not qualify at all. That leaves thousands of Native people navigating a complicated healthcare system without support, often paying out of pocket or simply going without. This myth ignores the real crisis, a system that's legally owed, but routinely neglected. Treaties don't matter anymore. You might think treaties are just old pieces of paper, relics of the past with no modern meaning. But here's the truth. Treaties still matter, legally and morally. Between the 1700s and late 1800s, the U.S. signed hundreds of treaties with Native nations. These weren't just handshakes or symbolic gestures. They were binding legal agreements between sovereign governments. Land was ceded, rights were guaranteed, and promises were made. But while Native nations upheld their side, the U.S. government violated or ignored most of these treaties. Still, treaties haven't disappeared. Courts continue to recognize their authority. In fact, major legal decisions, like the 2020 McGirt v. Oklahoma case, reaffirmed that treaty rights still exist. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that much of eastern Oklahoma is still legally Native land, based on an 1830s treaty the government never officially dissolved. Treaties aren't obsolete. They're living documents, and they're still being tested in courtrooms across the country today. So when someone says, "That's just in the past," remind them, the law doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. All Native Americans live on reservations. If your image of Native Americans starts and ends with life on a reservation, you're missing the full picture. Today, over 70% of Native Americans live off-reservation, mostly in urban and suburban areas. Cities like Los Angeles, Denver, Minneapolis, and Phoenix have large Native populations. These communities are thriving, but often invisible. This trend didn't just happen by chance. In the 1950s, the federal government launched the Indian Relocation Act, a program that encouraged Native people to leave their homelands for cities with promises of jobs, housing, and opportunity. Many were left with nothing, cut off from their families, culture, and tribal services. But Native people adapted. They built community centers, started advocacy groups, and kept their traditions alive, even in concrete jungles. Urban Native identity is complex. Many city dwellers return to their homelands for ceremonies, speak their languages, and vote in tribal elections. Others were born and raised in cities, yet still carry their culture proudly. So no, not all Native Americans live on reservations. And where someone lives doesn't make them more or less Native. Identity isn't about geography. It's about community, heritage, and connection. Native Americans didn't resist. There's a dangerous myth that Native Americans simply accepted colonization, as if they didn't fight back. That couldn't be further from the truth. Native resistance was constant, for centuries. From the earliest days of European invasion to the closing of the frontier, Native nations defended their lands, their people, and their sovereignty through diplomacy, protest, and war. Warriors like Tecumseh, Geronimo, Crazy Horse, and Osceola led military campaigns against overwhelming odds. Entire tribes stood against U.S. soldiers, broken treaties, and forced removal. But resistance didn't end on the battlefield. Native people resisted boarding schools by holding onto language in secret. They preserved ceremonies outlawed by the government. They continued teaching their children who they were, even when the world told them not to. In the modern era, resistance evolved. From the American Indian Movement's stand at Wounded Knee in 1973, to the water protectors at Standing Rock in 2016, to every Native artist, activist, and youth raising their voice today. Native resistance never stopped. It simply changed forms, from arrows to courtrooms, from drums to microphones. And it continues, with strength, dignity, and purpose. If you're Native, you look a certain way. Hollywood has done a lot of damage when it comes to Native identity. For decades, movies and media portrayed Native people as one type: long braids, feathers, leather buckskins, and copper-toned skin. But the truth is, there's no single way to look Native. Native people come in every shade, with every hairstyle, and in every style of dress. From ribbon skirts and beadwork to jeans, hoodies, and business suits. Some have darker complexions. Others are light-skinned. Some speak their traditional language fluently. Others are just starting to learn. Why? Because colonization scattered Native communities. Through relocation, forced boarding schools, adoption programs, and intermarriage. Native families have endured generations of trauma that often separated them from their culture. But identity isn't just about appearance. It's about connection. To your community, to your ancestors, to your traditions. Some tribes use blood quantum, while others go by lineal descent. But identity is complex, and it's not something you can determine by looks alone. So the next time someone says, "You don't look Native," remind them, you don't have to look like a stereotype to carry your people with you. Native Americans were paid for their land. Some people claim that Native Americans were paid fairly for the land that was taken, as if this whole story was just a massive real estate deal. But let's be clear, most Native land was not bought. It was stolen. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the U.S. government signed treaties with Native nations that often involved coercion, mistranslation, or outright fraud. Sometimes land was ceded under the threat of violence or starvation. Sometimes it was taken without consent at all. Even when treaties were honored on paper, the payments were delayed, reduced, or never delivered. In many cases, Native nations were forced onto smaller and less fertile land while their traditional homelands were opened for settlement, railroads, and resource extraction. Take the Black Hills in South Dakota, sacred land of the Lakota. The U.S. promised it would belong to them forever. But when gold was discovered, the government seized it. Over a century later, the Supreme Court ruled that the taking was illegal and awarded a monetary settlement. But the Lakota refused the money. Why? Because you can't put a price on sacred land. So no, Native Americans were not fairly compensated. What was taken can't be measured in dollars. It was generations of connection, culture, and belonging gone. Tribal casinos made everyone rich. A lot of people assume that tribal casinos made every Native American rich, that there's luxury on every reservation and payouts for every tribal member. But like most myths, this one only tells part of the story, and it leaves out the truth. Only a small percentage of tribes operate large, profitable casinos. Many others either don't have casinos at all, or their operations are small and barely profitable due to location, competition, or strict state compacts. Even for tribes that do generate revenue from gaming, the money isn't just handed out. Most of it is reinvested into the community to fund healthcare clinics, language preservation, housing programs, education, and infrastructure. Some tribes provide modest per capita payments to members, but this varies greatly and is often not enough to live on. And here's the real kicker. Many of the poorest counties in America are still on native land, despite nearby casinos. That's because casinos were never a fix-all. They're a tool, a sovereign right. And like any business, their success depends on location, oversight, and reinvestment. So no, casinos didn't make every Native American wealthy. But when run well, they help build tribal sovereignty and bring opportunity on Native terms. Native culture is extinct or frozen in the past. Too often, Native culture is seen as something ancient, like it belongs in museums, textbooks, or history books. But Native culture isn't extinct. It's not frozen in time. It's alive and evolving every day. Yes, we still hold powwows. We still sing traditional songs, dance in regalia, and speak our ancestral languages. But Native creativity isn't locked in the past. Today, Native culture is on TikTok, in fashion runways, on TV shows, and in hip-hop lyrics. Native designers are reimagining beadwork with futuristic style. Native chefs are reclaiming traditional foods. Native authors are winning awards and telling stories the world was never taught. And Native youth, they're blending tradition with technology, streaming from the res, editing videos on their phones, speaking their language while making memes. It's culture, with a modem and a moccasin. What's extinct is the idea that Native people must only exist in the past. Native culture didn't die. It adapted. It resisted erasure and kept moving forward, just like the people who carry it. Native people just need to move on. You've probably heard it before. That was so long ago. Native people just need to move on. But how do you move on from something that's still happening? Native communities are still fighting to protect their land, their water, their children, and their sacred traditions. Boarding schools may have closed, but their trauma lives on in families. Missing and murdered Indigenous women are still disappearing at alarming rates. Sacred sites are still bulldozed for pipelines. Treaties are still challenged in court. Move on is what people say when they don't want to deal with the consequences of history or take responsibility for the present. The truth is, Native people have always moved forward, but never by forgetting. We move forward by remembering, by resisting, by surviving. And when someone says, "Get over it," what they really mean is, be quiet. But Native voices are growing louder. From city councils to Congress, from TikTok to Hollywood, Native people are speaking truth, and they're not going anywhere. We're not stuck in the past. We're shaping the future. The stories we tell shape the world we live in. For too long, Native people have been spoken for, reduced to stereotypes, erased from classrooms, or frozen in time. But the truth is more powerful, more complex, and more human than any myth. Native communities are not relics. They are mothers and fathers, warriors and teachers, artists and leaders, living, breathing, thriving. If you've made it this far, thank you. You're part of a growing circle of people committed to learning, unlearning, and honoring truth. Subscribe to First Nations Uncovered as we continue to explore the real stories